I hate to say this, but every day it seems like our country is getting closer and closer to a national divorce. Now, what do I mean by that? A national divorce. What I mean is at first a spiritual division will happen among the people of our country, and that spiritual division will eventually precipitate into an actual physical separation. To be blunt, I mean ultimately a permanent dissolution of the political bonds of our union due to a fundamental and irreconcilable disagreement over America's ideological foundation and governing philosophy. And if you think I'm overstating things, just take a quick look at the direction the country's been headed over the past couple of years. I remember reading a blog post at Ace of Spades HQ in 2018 titled, "Given the state of near hostilities in our political culture, is it unthinkable that the country may split?" Now, this post was written shortly after a left-wing zealot and Bernie Sanders supporter attempted to straight-up murder several Republican lawmakers and security officers on a softball field back in 2017. And the point of Ace's post is this: just because an event is unlikely doesn't mean that it can't happen. Improbable things happen all the time. He pointed out that the odds of winning a Powerball lottery are huge against a person's favor. And yet every month or so we hear of someone hitting the jackpot. Ace points out the fact that the United States almost broke apart once before. And the only reason it didn't was because of a war that cost hundreds of thousands of lives. The American Civil War should serve as proof that anyone who dismisses outright the idea that a second American Civil War dismisses that as a possibility, as a possibility that's not even worth considering. Anybody who thinks that way is irresponsible and foolish. And we would be foolish to believe that a national divorce could never come about. Ace wrote, and I quote, "If a people no longer act like a people, how long will they remain formally, officially, a people? At what point will the formal arrangement change to reflect the actual, on-the-ground reality?" At the time, I considered his point here, and I could see where he was coming from, but I brushed it off as implausible. I mean, think about it. This is what I thought. There's no way the United States of America, the land that I love, could ever bottom out to the point of breaking apart. Right? That's what I thought. But I bookmarked the post in my tablet and in the back of my mind. And a couple of days ago, some 2.5 years later, I was cleaning out my bookmarks and I came across Ace's post. I reread it, and I reread it in the light of everything that has happened in our nation in the past couple of years. And I found myself thinking that maybe Ace, unfortunately, was onto something. I thought of all the chaos and the violence and the instability that dominates the news cycle these days, and I thought, is it possible that the United States of America could really break apart? Is it more likely today than it was 2 years ago or even a year ago that our nation is in the preliminary stages of a national divorce? Are we in the ideological stage or the spiritual stage of separation? That stage that precedes an actual physical separation? Well, I hope not. Lord, I hope not. But before we can blow that idea off as impossible, let's take a step back and take an objective look at the reality of our current situation. Just this year alone, unrest over the death of George Floyd has quickly turned into 130 some odd days of riots and violent uprisings, or at least attempted uprisings, in which far left insurrectionists, they're tearing down statues, they're attacking police, they're blocking off streets and holding innocent motorists at gunpoint. They're storming courthouses and other federal buildings. They're burning businesses to the ground and destroying private property. And the chaos has even reached the point that some of these radical insurrectionists have even killed people simply because they hold different political positions. They have killed people who support Trump or back the blue or whatever. The point is that some of these leftists are resorting to murder. They are actually reaching the point where they are willing to murder their political opponents. And on top of all that, we've got this overreaching, this stifling lockdown that is driving people stir crazy, and it's fueling the distrust and the separation. It's clear to me that the United States is not the same United States from 20 years ago. It's not even the same United States from 2 years ago. I mean, in 2018, when I read that blog post, I thought the idea of a national divorce was implausible. It was just blog rhetoric. But now, 2 years later in 2020, I'm not so sure. To paraphrase C.S. Lewis from his book, The Great Divorce, it's becoming clear that we no longer live in a country where if we keep following our current ideological roads, now we will somehow circle around and draw gradually closer together until we finally meet in the middle. No. Those days are long gone. We are instead living in a country where the paths we're on are going in two opposing directions, toward two polar opposite ends. And the fact is, these roads are not circling back around toward unity. They are, in fact, moving in straight lines farther and farther apart. Tim Poole is an independent online journalist and commentator who leans somewhat to the right on some issues, and he's been sounding this national divorce topic for a while. Like Ace, he's been ahead of the curve on this, and he's been sounding the alarm for at least the past couple of years. And I respect his opinion. He's not an alarmist. I don't agree with everything he says, but I respect his opinion, and I think maybe it's time to consider the unthinkable, the formerly implausible. Is the United States of America in the throes of a spiritual separation? Or to put it in more political terms, is our country in the midst of a cold civil war, an ideological civil war? You see these articles and opinion pieces and tweets and what have you, and you can tell that the people see it coming. People on the right and on the left, the media see it coming. The politicians see it coming. And I'm here to tell you that in this election, this upcoming election, no matter who wins, this election has a strong potential to whip this country up into a national frenzy. And again, I hope this isn't the case. I pray to God that we have a fair and peaceful election. But if you ask me, what you'll probably see in November is that no matter the outcome, no matter who wins, you're going to have a protracted battle in which neither candidate will concede. And then that battle will be a long and messy process that will only fan the flames of tension in our country. And that could lead to more rioting and more violence and further division. And as we move closer to Election Day 2020, the tensions are only going to escalate and the divide is only going to get worse. Again, I hope this is not the case. But based on the way things have been going, I wonder, could we see our current cold civil war, if we are indeed in a cold civil war right now, could we see that current cold civil war transition into a hot civil war, where people move beyond rhetoric and start using weapons and live ammo to instigate a physical division? I saw a post on Politico the other day that said both the left and the right are seeing street-level violence as an option. Now, to be fair, the leftists are instigating a large majority of it, leaving the right with no choice but to hit back. So where do we go from here? Comedian Colin Quinn suggested last year that the country should just go ahead and break up, should just go ahead and call it quits, that the U.S. should break up into city-states like the Soviet Union did with a separate but together system. In a 2019 interview with CNN, Quinn said that the country is on the verge of exploding. And remember, he said this over a year before all the riots. To his credit, Quinn declined to blame President Trump for all the discord. Rather, the comedian said that Trump is just a byproduct of this breakup and not the manifestation of it. Quinn called the country too disparate, and he said that the nation is on the verge of a civil war. Quinn then quipped, it would be the first war where you see fat refugees. And then he said, I don't know if we can move past, Quinn said. I mean, somebody who's strong enough to say, look, here's how I feel about everything. I don't care what any poll says. I don't care what anybody says in either, because both parties are led by extremists and led by social media. So unless there's somebody who's like can speak practically and just say, look, this is what I feel. You know what I mean? You're never going to resolve it. It's too disparate. I hate to admit it, but I think Colin Quinn is right, at least partially. He's right when he said that our nation is currently too philosophically disparate. When he said that we're too ideologically divided. We're too divided on a fundamental level to live together in the same house. I think there's some truth in that. But I don't want a national divorce. I want the country to stay together. But if we're going to work this out, we have to get to the root of the problem. And the root of the problem isn't Trump. The root of the problem is not Joe Biden. It's not Nancy Pelosi. At its core, the problem isn't with people. The problem is with the ideas that people hold. And the real question isn't who's to blame. The real question is, what ideas have some Americans accepted that have put us on opposing paths? What ideas are at the bottom, at the foundation of our current divide? I'd like to take a stab at an answer. I think in a broad fundamental sense that there are two competing philosophies at work among the American populace. One of those is traditionally American, and the other is distinctly anti-American. And those two roads, those two philosophical paths in their most basic forms are individualism, which as far as ideas go is probably the foundational idea of America as a civilization. And the other is collectivism, which at its core is in direct opposition to the founding principles of this country. Let's talk about collectivism first. You see the philosophy of collectivism at work today, most at work today, in our national society, in the form of cultural Marxism. Some people call it social Marxism. Some people call it neo-Marxism. It's all the same thing. Now, what do I mean by Marxism? Well, you see, classical Marxism, in a nutshell, is an economic philosophy. And what it does, it divides people along economic lines. It separates people into two groups, the financial haves and the financial have-nots. The bourgeoisie versus the proletariat, the property owners versus the working class, the rich versus the poor. And after it separates people into groups, it then pits them against each other. Marx believed there was a finite amount of capital, a finite amount of wealth in society. And his philosophy makes the claim that the haves and the have-nots should naturally be in opposition to each other, seeing as how the haves, the people of means, the people of wealth, accumulated their means at the expense of the have-nots. And according to Marx, the best way to solve this economic disparity is for the government to step in, to take money by force from the haves, and then redistribute their wealth so that everyone has a fair share of means. Now, this may sound good to some people on paper, but check the paper in the history books. Every time this sort of collectivistic Marxist philosophy has been put into practice in the real world, it turns out to be a colossal failure that results in atrocious human misery rather than financial equality. The Pilgrim colonists tried this system out when they came to the New World, and they nearly starved to death. And that's not to mention the millions of deaths that have come about as a result of this atrocious philosophy. Cultural Marxism operates in the same way, except instead of an economic philosophy like classical Marxism, cultural Marxism is a social philosophy. It's a social philosophy that divides people into arbitrary social groups. They divide them on social lines rather than economic lines. Social lines like race, gender, religion, sexual preference, you name it. And instead of the haves and the have-nots, you have the oppressors and the oppressed. The oppressors are the people of the quote-unquote privileged race, the privileged gender, sexual persuasion, religion, whatever. These are the people who hold, again, all the quote-unquote social capital or social power. These oppressors supposedly accumulated their social power and their social privilege at the expense of those poor, helpless, underprivileged social minorities. They did that by oppressing them. Now, if you're a member of the privileged group, say a white, straight Christian male, then you, by default, are more powerful and more privileged than, let's say, a black, gay, female Scientologist or whatever. And as a result of this power disparity, this disparity in social power, the government has a moral obligation to step in and forcibly subjugate you, the privileged oppressor, and take your unearned social power from you. And how they're going to do that, I've never been quite sure on that, but whatever it is, I'm sure it's not going to be a pleasant procedure. And once they have oppressed you, the oppressor, then they will take your power and redistribute that power to some underprivileged social minority. Now, to some people, that system might sound good on paper. But like classical economic Marxism, when you apply social Marxism to real life, all it does is foster envy and tyranny and misery and hatred. Now, cultural Marxism as a philosophy is a doomed ideology from the get-go because it facilitates and actively promotes division. No matter what its adherents claim, it does not bring people together into some sort of utopia of equality because it's not designed to do that. That's not what economic or cultural Marxism is designed to do. Cultural Marxism is designed to drive people apart. It jams wedges in between people and drives the society apart. And as a result, it destroys everything it touches. And it does that by stripping people of their individuality and then lumping them into soulless and faceless groups. And then it pits those groups against each other into some sort of tribal warfare, Hunger Games style struggle for the make-believe fairy tale prize that is social power or social privilege. That social privilege, man, that's the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. I mean, you got certain people that swear it's there, but they've never seen it. Because in reality, it doesn't exist. Cultural Marxism is inherently an anti-American philosophy, and I'll tell you why. Because, like I said, it strips human beings of their individuality, and it defines them not by the content of their individual character, but by the arbitrary identity of whatever group or collective they belong to. In cultural Marxism, the group is elevated, the group is paramount, while the individual is subordinated. Group identity smothers and snuffs out the identity of the individual person. Don't think for yourself. Let the collective do the thinking for you. The group's dogma, the tribe's dogma, eclipses the independent thinking of the individual. The group's hive mind mentality steps to the fore and forcibly subordinates individual autonomous human reasoning and decision-making. And anyone who surrenders his mind to the group and embraces that group identity and the concept of groupthink will naturally start seeing people who are not part of their group as others. They will come to instinctively identify people not by their individual character, but by the group they belong to. This, of course, is bad because it strips people of their individuality. It strips them of their God-given individual dignity. And when you strip someone of his or her individuality, it dehumanizes them, and it makes it easier to vilify them and label them not as a person, but as some sort of thing, some separate, foreign, non-human villain entity altogether. I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about. I saw on Facebook the other day. Yeah, I know Facebook. Okay. My home state of Louisiana recently experienced yet another hurricane, Hurricane Delta. It was just a month or so ago, 6 weeks or so ago, that Hurricane Laura did quite a bit of damage to our state, particularly the southern and central portion. Well, now Hurricane Delta at the time was coming in, And I saw on Facebook where some lady said, the one good thing about this new hurricane is at least it may hit Lake Charles and wipe out the rest of those Trump supporters down there. I mean, did you see what she just did? This loudmouth, this obnoxious loudmouth is wishing death upon people because they're not part of her political tribe. And I don't care if you think she's just mouthing off. You don't joke about things like that. Just the other day, Keith Olbermann, another hateful leftist zealot, called President Trump a terrorist. And he called for President Trump and his supporters to be expunged and removed from our society so that the opponents, the opponents of President Trump can come in and start to rebuild society. Olbermann said here, Trump can be and must be expunged. His enablers, the Mike Lees, the William Barrs, and the Sean Hannitys, and the Mike Pences, and the Amy Coney Barretts must be prosecuted and convicted and removed from our society. I mean, you can agree with those people or not, or like them or not, but I mean, what in the world has Amy Coney Barrett done to be prosecuted and convicted and removed from our society? What in the world has she done to warrant that? Any of these people. That's what othering does. It causes you to treat people who aren't like you like they're your enemies. The process of othering people, people who don't think like your group, people who don't look like your group, it forces people to make enemies of people who they may otherwise be friends with. It hyper-politicizes everything, and it instigates animosity and hatred. And it flat out prevents people from living as civilized neighbors in a peaceful society. But again, there's the rub. There's the hang up. Collectivists don't want a peaceful society. Remember, these cultural Marxists are driven by power and authority. They seek social power. They seek economic power. And they don't aim to live and let live. They aim to rule. And when these people talk about service, you serving the greater good, the individual serving the group, when they talk about service, keep in mind that there's someone doing the service and then there's someone being served. The person who speaks to you about slaves and masters, you can bet that that person intends to be the master. Collectivists want to subordinate you to their authority. But to do that, first they got to get their grubby little fingers around your individual identity and strangle it until they can break your spirit and kill your aspiration and your integrity. They do that by causing you to doubt yourself and to doubt your own mind. They tell you that you can't trust your own judgment. They'll guilt trip you into giving up your self-respect and your God-given individual identity. And once a man or woman gives up his or her integrity and self-respect, then they're just ripe for the picking. And they'll become a slave to the first tyrant that comes along. That's the collectivist philosophy. And that is the philosophy that is ripping our country apart. The philosophy of individualism, however, elevates the individual as a sovereign entity in his or her own right. It celebrates individual character and independent thinking. It teaches that a person doesn't need to be a member of a group to be valuable. An individualist understands that he or she is valuable in their own right. The philosophy of individualism regards every person, every individual man and woman, as an independent and sovereign entity who possesses an inalienable right to his or her own life and to his or her own mind. This idea of the sanctity of the individual lies not just at the root of the United States of America, but of Western civilization as a whole. And the idea finds its origins naturally in the Bible, way back in the book of Genesis, when God created human beings in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. Every human being bears the image of God. And that fact makes every human life valuable and worthy of a certain basic level of dignity and respect. To put it simply, your life is valuable because God values your life. He is your creator. He is the source of all that is you. And you can see there in Psalm 139, He made you to exist as part of His world. He fearfully and wonderfully formed your inner parts and knitted you together in your mother's womb. But before He formed you on a physical level, He knew you on an intellectual level. From eternity past, you existed in the mind of God. And like God told Jeremiah, the prophet Jeremiah, before your conception, He had already consecrated your life with a divinely ordained destiny. In short, God created you for a purpose. God created you because He has a plan for you, based on His own independent sovereignty, by His own free choice, not out of compulsion and not out of need, but with authentic and sincere desire. God has called you forth for an individual purpose. And He forever solidified His decree when He created you to live as a reflection of His divine image. In His infinite wisdom, God, the ultimate individual, shared His image, His individuality with you. An individual is valuable in his own right because Almighty God says so, because God made them that way. A person doesn't need to find self-worth in some group. He can instead find value in himself. He doesn't need to ride someone else's coattails to acquire an identity or a healthy sense of self-respect. Self-respect is essential for achieving your God-given destiny. But like anything else of real value, if you want self-respect, then you have to go out and earn it. You can't latch yourself onto some group and latch yourself onto some group identity and mooch respect and dignity off of others. It doesn't work like that. Real life doesn't work like that. If you want self-respect, then you're going to have to get up every day like a man, like a real woman, and go out and earn it. You, yourself. Just as an adult gets up and goes to work every day to earn a living, we as individuals must likewise get up out of bed, walk out the door like a man, walk out the door like a woman, and earn our own self-respect on a daily basis. You can't rely on some group to give it to you. You, yourself, as an individual, have to go out and earn it. And if we want to live in a country where people respect each other and respect themselves and get along, then we're going to have to go back to America's roots and embrace the philosophy of individualism. Ayn Rand said it best when she said, "Individualism regards man, every man, as an independent sovereign entity who possesses an inalienable right to his own life. Individualism holds that a civilized society or any form of association, cooperation, or peaceful coexistence among men can be achieved only on the basis of the recognition of individual rights, and that a group as such has no rights other than the individual rights of its members. There are no rights of special groups. There are only the rights of man, rights possessed by every individual man and by all men as individuals. The principle of individual rights is the only moral base of all groups or associations." Did you see what she did there? Did you catch that there? She made an excellent point that is 100% true. Groups don't have special rights. There are only the individual rights of the individual men and women who make up the group. There is no such thing as a group identity. There's no such thing as a group mind. And that's why cultural Marxism cannot work in the real world. It is destined to fail. And if we embrace that ideology as a nation, we are going to fail right along with it. If we want to get our country back on track, individualism is the most rational way to maintain a peaceful, productive, and civilized society. To paraphrase Ayn Rand, an individualist is not some person who says, "I'll do as I please," at everybody else's expense. No, absolutely not. An individualist is a person who recognizes the inalienable, God-given individual rights of all human beings, his own rights, and the rights of others. An individualist wants to be left alone, to run his own life as he sees fit. He does not want to run anybody else's life. He doesn't want to tell another man where he must or must not go. He doesn't want to tell another man what he can or can't say. An individualist does not want to run someone else's life, nor does he want anyone else to run his life. He doesn't want to be a master of or a slave to another man. An individualist knows how to balance his respect for himself with respect for his neighbors. And not just for his closest, most immediate neighbors like his family and his friends, but for everyone. Every individual man and every individual woman who forms the community in which he lives. Take a look at these two pictures. Imagine this first window is the ideal American society. Look at its composition there. It's a group of individual panes of glass joined together with their individual sovereignty still intact, yet each pane is working together to form a cohesive whole. This is what a healthy individualistic society looks like. Now take a look at this other pane here. Cultural Marxism is the rock that knocked that gaping hole in the glass and cracked that pane into this fragile intersection of arbitrary groups. The more we find reasons to divide ourselves, the deeper and deeper these cracks will grow. These cracks will grow deeper and wider between these groups, and the crack will spread across the entire pane until the whole pane shatters and collapses. And then the shards will just sit there until someone with a big broom comes along and brushes them into the dustbin of history. That's how Marxism works. It's a poisonous and malignant philosophy that will ruin America if we keep allowing it to divide us. I won't sit idly by while Marxist thugs try harder and harder to break our great nation apart. I don't want that for America. I love my country. I love its ideals. I love its founding principles and its values. And the unifying principle that our American society is founded upon is the sovereignty and sanctity of the individual. If we would all just stop seeing ourselves as members of groups, as victims who are battling against each other in some ill-conceived war for power, and if we would start seeing ourselves, start seeing each other for who we really are, men and women with souls and lives and families, then we could all work together to put an end to this bickering real quick. The name of this channel is The Moral of the Story, and one of the purposes I want to accomplish with this channel is to use good stories to show what morality looks like in reality. I believe stories, as Jordan Peterson once put it, give image and word to fundamental reality. I believe that stories can help us see how individual principles and values play out in real life, how they're connected to reality, even if that reality just happens to be set a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. I want to close this video with a short clip from one of my favorite TV shows, Star Wars: The Mandalorian. I think this clip will demonstrate how groupthink leads to perpetual conflict, while judging each individual person on an individual basis is the best way to restore peace in our society. Let me give you a little background to help you set the scene here. The Mandalorian, the guy in the mask here, he is a bounty hunter named Din Djarin, and he was hired to capture an unknown target. Turns out, his target that he was supposed to hunt down and capture is a baby Yoda species. Now, if you're familiar with Star Wars at all, you know that Yoda was a Jedi Master who was very, very powerful with the Force. And this Force-sensitive baby of the same species is also preternaturally gifted with Force powers, thus linking him with the Jedi. Now, the Mandalorians as a group and the Jedi as a group were historic enemies. They were frequently at war with each other. And according to Mandalorian legends, Mandalore the Great fought a series of battles against the Jedi. And throughout the eons, the Mandalorians and the Jedi as two groups engaged in many brutal conflicts. And their last great struggle resulted in the near destruction of the planet Mandalore, the Mandalorians' home planet. And that left the Mandalorians decimated, while the Jedi emerged victorious. I tell you all of this to explain that Mandalorians as a group and the Jedi as a group have good reasons to dislike each other. They have a long history of war and animosity. But throughout the show, this particular Mandalorian, Din Djarin, he learns to put groupthink aside. He learns to put his tribe, the groupthink of his tribe, aside, and he becomes a father figure to this child who, instead of hunting, he has now sworn to protect. The scene we're about to watch, what this scene does, it provides an image of how the philosophy of individualism brings people from different and even antagonistic backgrounds together. It shows how individualism can bring people together and unite them in a civil and loving relationship.
Show me the one whose safety deemed such destruction.
This is the one.
This is the one that you hunted, then saved?
Yes. The one that saved me as well.
From the Mudhorn?
Yes.
It looks helpless.
It's injured, but it is not helpless. Its species can move objects with its mind.
I know of such things. The songs of eons past tell of battles between Mandalore the Great and an order of sorcerers called Jedi that fought with such powers.
It is an enemy?
No. Its kind were enemies, but this individual is not.
What this clip does, it shows how two people who belong to two different tribes, two different backgrounds, can become not just friends, but family. And they can develop that special relationship with each other when they put group dogma aside and instead judge each individual person by his or her individual character. A nation of individualists will build a productive and respectful society because individualists recognize and respect the inalienable rights of every person, their own rights as well as the rights of their neighbor. Individualists don't judge other people by the actions of some group. Instead, they judge each individual man and each individual woman by their individual words and actions, by their individual character, or lack thereof. That's how we're going to get America back on track and prevent a national divorce. We can't keep lumping each other into arbitrary groups. And we can't keep having this tribal warfare go on in our society. We can't keep behaving in an antisocial manner and expect our country to succeed. A rational person, an individualist, understands this fact. Our country would be a much more peaceful place if each person would see his neighbor not as a member of some group, but for who he or she actually is, a living soul, an individual human being who bears the image of God. Our cities, our communities would be healthier and more productive if each person would respect the God-given individual rights of their fellow man just as he would his own. If each person would follow the instructions of Jesus Christ and love his neighbor just as he loves himself, if he would treat his neighbor the same way he would want his neighbor to treat him. To paraphrase C.S. Lewis one more time, our national rescue consists in getting back on the right road. At the moment, we as Americans, at least some of us, seem to have lost our way. And if this country has any hope of staying unified, we have got to get back on the right path. We must start treating each other the right way, like individuals. Individualism is the way. Like the Mandalorian would say, this is the way to unifying our people and saving the country we love.